just getting used to it. So welcome to Galatians, and I might say the book of Galatians, and if I say the book of Galatians, you can say she means the letter of Galatians. So what an amazing pivot from Acts, where we studied 21 weeks. Who does that? You guys did. Did you see your badge in the newsletter? You got your badge. 21 weeks. In Acts, gosh, about half or more of Acts is kind of a biography of Paul. So we're seeing someone say, oh, Paul did this, and then Paul did that, and then Paul did this other thing. And then Galatians, we actually get to hear Paul. Oh, amazing. He did not speak English. He spoke Aramaic. So we're hearing a translation, but close enough. It's close enough. We hear Paul. We get a slice of his brain and his heart and his words, his ideas and his passion. Oh, such passion, especially in Galatians. So it is such a treat, I think, to read Galatians right after we've heard about Paul. So did Paul just write one letter? He wrote quite a few letters. And then some of them got saved and put into the New Testament. So other places where you can hear, read, imagine Paul, Romans is a letter, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, perhaps Ephesians and Colossians, Thessalonians, Philemon. So he's all, as Madeline said, oh, he wrote a lot of the New Testament. He did. And so for each letter, we imagine, what was the occasion? Why did Paul write that letter? And why did they keep it? So it's so much fun. So who are the Galatians? Well, is it map time? I think it's map time. So where's Galatia? See if we have our little spotter there. Do you see that over there? We're zeroing in. So Galatia is in this region we now call Asia Minor, which is not Asia. Okay, don't be confused by that. It's like Turkey, where the country of Turkey is. So you see Galatia there. So we're now 100% whether it was to the southern Galatia, where in Acts 13:14 we heard about Paul's adventures there, or if it was the northern part of the region of Galatia. So we're not 100%. And actually, have you ever heard of the Celts before? If something's Celtic, they came from Galatia. So it's a place that Paul did a lot of work in, and now there's a reason he's not there, but he feels the need to get back with them. So I thought I'd share with you an overview, especially of Galatians chapters 1 and 2, to empower you to read on your own, because it gets kind of confusing, like what the heck's going on, or what's Paul referring to? So here's a bit of a timeline that I hope can help you, and some of it's review, because we talked a lot about this in Acts. So there's we'll go down the first column there. First part of Paul's life, we'll call it pre-revelation. Remember what Paul used to be like? Paul was a big religious leader. He was zealous. He was a persecutor of the church. Then Paul received a revelation. Revelation just means kind of an intervention, light, insight. He had a revelation of Jesus Christ. How many remember this story on the road to Damascus? So, my goodness, Paul tells that story. It's told Acts 9, and then he tells it more than once. So it was quite the personal experience that just completely changed his life, turned his life around from being a persecutor to a promoter of Jesus Christ. So he had a revelation, and then he had a call. So that's pretty cool. All of you have that. So he was given instruction by God, and when we follow that instruction from God, that is how we found our happiness and our purpose. So he was given a instruction to share the revelation of Jesus Christ's grace, especially to, quote, the Gentiles. And that's so hard for us this day to figure out. But Paul was part of a stream of religion loosely called the Jews. Jesus was a Jew, the disciples were Jews. Paul was a Jew. Most of the work of the Gospels were about Jews. Paul had a very interesting call to go to people who were not Jewish. And anybody who wasn't was called a Gentile. So for some reason, he had a gift that he was given to share with people who weren't Jews about the grace of Christ. So, somewhat familiar if you've been following on the Acts, but then for 3 years, and this we found out in Galatians study this week. We didn't know this. I forgot this. Looks like for 3 years, Paul was in Damascus, then he went to, quote, Arabia, whatever that is, and then back to Damascus. Then he took a trip to Jerusalem, the mothership. So in this telling, we're hearing about 2 trips to Jerusalem so far. So he took a quick trip into Jerusalem to see, am I on track? Am I okay? So it just shows him, he's not running amok. Okay, Beth Flint, he's not running amok. We talk about that in the deacons. So he went to Jerusalem to say, I had this revelation. I'm working for 3 years. Am I getting it straight? And they gave him a seal of approval. You're on track. So he got that checkup. Then for 14 years, he had his first big chunk of ministry in that Asia Minor region, which we read a lot about in Acts. So he worked. Then he came back to Jerusalem again. So now we're in that second column. It's trip number 2 to Jerusalem. And this is an epic meeting. He had a revelation that told him, he said, that I need to go to Jerusalem. So he went to Jerusalem. And this story is actually told in Acts chapter 15. So if you're feeling nerdy later on, read Acts chapter 15 and compare it to Galatians 1 and 2. Because Paul's personal telling of what happened is a little different than what Acts kind of smooths things over a little bit. He goes to Jerusalem. He brings with him Barnabas and Titus. And he said he was checking out, am I on track here? Is this what you want me to do? Looking for, just checking in, because he's not trying to run amok. He's not trying to run the show. He's making sure that he's kosher, that he is following the instruction of Jesus Christ, especially as he's been given a witness to share with the Gentiles, those outsider people. And so, they're like, yeah, Paul, you're on track. He gets a big seal of approval, big thumbs up. Yes, what you're doing at the Gentiles is on track. How you are doing this, absolutely fine, no problem. Then Paul says, there were some spies there trying to take away our freedom. And then but we did not submit to them. So I think Paul is again using his life as an example of, you got to stand up for the grace of God that you know in Jesus Christ. So he mentions that. And then, and of course, he was told to remember the poor. That's a signature of followers of Jesus Christ. So one little detail he weaves in Galatians, when he retells his story, like years ago, in my second trip to Jerusalem, I was with Titus? I was with Titus, who is obviously a Gentile, and they said to him, you do not have to be circumcised. And that's where we get into this realm as modern people who try to follow Jesus Christ, like circumcision. Why is that such a big deal? Apparently, it was a big deal in the world of early Jesus followers. So it was associated with Abraham in Genesis, and it was associated with, you must do this in order to signify that you are right with God. So the two things went hand in hand, and circumcision was tied to, quote, the law. And the law, capital L, was this whole way of life that helped the people, Jewish people, follow God. So Paul's revelation was, this whole thing about grace is a gift from God for everybody. End of story. Grace is given to everybody. Jew, Greek, it's just God's deal. It is grace, not works. We'll talk about that later. So it's all about the grace of God seen in Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for us to show God's grace and mercy for a sinful world that is willing to kill an innocent man of God. And God's method was, nonviolent, and even in the place of the cross, new life came out of that from the Redeemer God. And that is the work of the Spirit and gives us hope. Lots of theology going on there. Paul said, that's enough. That's the gospel. And then it changes us, and then we love each other. So he spread that news, he left, and then for some reason, these other people came in and said, nope, actually, not good enough. God's grace is not good enough. You still got to do this ritual of circumcision. So that's what's going on. So you'll see that when you read Galatians. You'll be like, why all the circumcision stuff going on? And since the children aren't present, he even makes a racy joke. At some point, I think it's chapter 4, he says, those people who come in and tell you should be circumcised, I wish they would castrate themselves. Okay, a little bit of rated R material in Galatians. Paul's kind of fired up in Galatians. You can tell this because, so anyway, I was at the Jerusalem thing. Then there was an incident after the Jerusalem meeting where Paul welcomes Peter up to Antioch, north of Jerusalem. And Peter's all about the Gentiles. Hi, Gentiles, let's get some pizza, no problem. Hanging out with the Gentiles. Then another group comes in that are a little bit more, must do other things in order to receive God's grace. And when they show up, Peter submits to peer pressure and stops fellowship with the Gentiles. And Paul's like, oh my gosh, that is not the gospel. And Paul confronts Peter. More on that later. So there was an Antioch incident. But Paul, we could say, in summary, had a good influence on the Galatians. And you can see it across the letter to the Galatians. Paul's like, oh my gosh, you guys, you respected me. I respected you. You did so much as a church. You were running well. Oh, you got it. I could see it. You felt it too, the Spirit. You were doing good things. So that was a good influence. But then after that time, there was some sort of poor influence that Paul at the beginning calls, seems to be some kind of other gospel going on here. Not that there is one, but Paul's like, someone's distorting your idea of the gift of God's grace. Thus, Paul wrote the letter to the Galatians. So that's kind of the timeline and some themes that you'll see. So a big question for us, by the way, I'm going to zero in. Verse 1:6 of Galatians is hilarious. Different translations said different things this week, but I kind of like the NRSV translation because it's a little spicy. A lot of Paul's letters are a lot more, grace and peace and flowers and puppies. And in Galatians, Paul, verse 6, early on says, I'm astonished at you guys. You're making me crazy because you have deserted the gospel. That's really strong words. So, yeah, full of passion here. Okay, so my question, I think our question is, what would make Galatians turn from the grace of God? What would make you turn from the grace of God and the freedom that we have in Jesus Christ to be our full selves and just receive that grace, and the Spirit is surging through our lives. We're bearing fruit of love, peace, patience, kindness, all going well. What would make us not, what would make us succumb to non-grace, a different way of life? Well, I was listening to a podcast this week and I thought, hey, here's some information that could relate to the ancient world, our world, in our own lives. So in the podcast, it was a Catholic priest and an Episcopal person who's a theologian who happens to be Episcopalian, but I think evangelical. He's done different stuff in his life. So they were talking, and one of their questions was, what the heck happened in World War II with the Germans? Right? Don't you ask yourself, like, what the heck happened there? What was going on? How does something like that happen? And the Catholic priest was saying that when he was early in his training, his mother had shared a picture of him taken in the mid-1930s Germany, and it was a whole bunch of Catholic priests and bishops in their full regalia, and maybe they had like a champagne glass, all looking merry and bright, and there in the middle of the picture, who was standing there with them? Adolf Hitler. What? And then the Protestant theologian was talking about, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Any of you heard of Bonhoeffer? Big time Lutheran. And so these two modern theologians I was listening to, looking back in history, are like, how does this happen? And they thought, the church was complicit with Hitler. So, it's just gutting. It's just gutting. How does this happen? So I just wonder if there's a little flavor of that in Paul talking to the Galatians. How did you succumb to this other way? You had grace and freedom in Christ. How in the world did you get off track? Well, within the same podcast, they pointed to, because everybody was confused after World War II, like how the heck did that happen? And so different studies were done, and one was by a Canadian sociologist. And he said that human beings succumb to that kind of a thing, if you want to call it authoritarianism, when they are under stress or they feel shame. So when their psychology is stress and shame, they're less likely to receive grace and freedom, and they might believe an alternative message. Very interesting. So, and then the Protestant theologian in this podcast did some research on authoritarianism, and he said he noticed 4 different aspects of authoritarian type of vibes. So I got the 4 aspects here. So I got in the left column, authoritarian. So that realm, that vibe is characterized by fear. You're scared of other people, fear. It's characterized by division. Oh, they're in, they're out. Division of people, us and them. Third thing, distortion. Not having a clear idea of what is the truth and focused on what is true. So distortion. We talked about that last week, actually. And the fourth thing is a suppression of dissent. So if you try to speak up and say, hey, is that not quite right? You're the problem. This kind of reminds me of last week we talked about healthy influence versus cult-like influence. I think it also applies to us as religious people. Like, how do you know if religion is true or if religion is oppressive? And then for us as Christians, what are our markers of the way of Jesus Christ? Like, how does that help us? If certain things make us get sucked in, certain other things help us resist and maybe have a healthier psychology. Well, friends, all the things for addressing those four things are in Galatians. They're all there. So you ready to take a quick romp and look? Fear, division, distortion, suppressing dissent. A lot of them are already in the text today. So in contrast to fear, love. Paul is all over love, all of his letters. So there's a particularly neat little thing he says at the end of Galatians. It's just 6 chapters long. He says, the whole law, the whole thing with the law, it's just love. Love your neighbor. Okay, in contrast to division, Paul has one of the most beautiful passages in the whole Bible. Let's see, do we get there next week? Or I think it's in 2 weeks. Super duper famous, game-changing verses. In chapter 3, it is in Galatians. Have you ever heard this? It's said at baptism. For there is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female. Radical even today. Because all are one in Jesus Christ. Super famous stuff became in Christian liturgy. That's in Galatians. So instead of like division, all are one. That's the gospel. That's the grace. And then distortion. Distortion's a tricky thing because people will say, I'm telling you the truth. No, I'm telling you the truth. So how do you know what the truth is? So that's a bigger topic. We'll probably tackle it another time. But Paul recognizes that that's going on, that that's a thing that happens. And so he's trying to lift up the true gospel. And that leads us to the final point in Galatians that I think is so powerful in the reading today, suppressing dissent. So sometimes religious people are the worst, aren't they? They won't let you say something against what the religion is. So, I better not say anything about, in the recent past, I've experienced you all saying stuff about divorce. Like, in this other church I was a part of, they were like, divorce had a certain thing. And you found this church or a Presbyterian church that just had a lot more gracious view of that or had space to talk about it. There was room to kind of discuss that. So dissent is important. Charlene had a good point about dissent. She's like, it says that Paul kind of confronted Peter. And, that seems can't that be sort of a cruel thing to do? Yes. Sometimes confrontation is violent and it is not helpful. So you have to look at the context. And the context here is Paul and Peter have a deep enough relationship that Paul can say to Peter, he can speak the truth in love to Peter. Plus, what Peter was doing was blatantly harmful to less powerful people. So Paul had to say, Peter, you were eating pizza with them yesterday. What's going on today? You are a hypocrite. So, but anyway, so I lift those up as markers for us so that we know what realm we're a part of and how we sort out what realm we are a part of, whether it's with one other person, a family member, Thanksgiving, it's coming up, in any situation, in any social situation, where you're just like, or what is the truth of this situation? We are marked by God's grace. And what helps us, because we're all human, we get stressed out, we have shame, topics for another time. What helps us remember to stay in the way of grace? Because anybody can fall prey to it. Try to move toward love, oneness, truth. What is the truth of the gospel? Remembering the truth of the gospel. We'll talk more about that. And then safety in saying, you know what? I see something different. I see something different going on there. And being able to be okay in a group in saying that out loud. So we're off to the races. Welcome to Galatians. To God be the glory. Amen.